Gur míle ag Pranjali agus Burren bio don cuire agus na súlagan go mbeidh siad sult as an le. A few words in Irish just to say thanks to Pranjali and Burren bio for the invitation, and I hope you enjoy the lecture this evening. It's entitled Religion, Magic and the Cure, the Holy Wells of the Burren. And the Burren, for the purposes of the evening, is geographically defined as corresponding to the Tim Robinson map, the Burren, a 2-inch map of the Burren uplands of northwest Clare. Holy wells have evolved in use over time, but broadly speaking, they're small bodies of water, invariably, which are interacted for religious and for medical wellness, though they have other uses as well. They're the principal uses of them. The holy well in the photograph, is called Tubber Dove, which means in English the Black Well. It's in the townland of Caherfada in Kildeboy, and it's one of 2 colour wells in the Burren. We've computed through our study 48 holy wells in the Burren, and 2 of the 48 are colour wells. Colour means that the well is named after a colour, and this particular one is called the Black Well because the water has a black hue to it, and that's why it's so called. And the water was used for dyeing in the past, as well as for the religious use also. So we'll talk a little bit more about colour wells later on, because I'm going to show you the other example of same. Just a second now. Sorry. So a few thank yous, Breakus, for people who've been on this journey with me. First of all, Dr. David Drew, he's known colloquially as the godfather of karst in Ireland. He's an outstanding hydrogeologist, and more about Dave and his contribution to my understanding of holy wells through the science aspect a little later on. Thanks to Aileen Drew as well, and thanks to Karen Funk for some great photographs and for being with me on some of this journey. Thanks also to Nick Gay. Photographs that are good tonight are his, and the ones that are mediocre are mine. And finally, a mention of a very important project that's come to its conclusion now. I think Pranjali mentioned it. It's under the auspices of Clare, or sorry, you should say the Heritage Council, Clare County Council, and it's a big project, and it's all about auditing, reporting on, and photographing all of the holy wells in all of County Clare, and there's over 220 of them, and they are being populated online on that particular. You can get through that link at the moment. So that's an outstanding project, and will be an outstanding reference regarding the holy wells of the county from here on in, you know. By the way, sorry, that particular photograph, all the photographs tonight are of Burren holy wells, and that one is of the well water in the case of St. John's Holy Well in Rathborney. Paula Capel is the town and south of Ballyvaughan, and two offerings only there, shards of pottery and a facsimile of a high cross. And St. John's Holy Well is one of only 2 of the 48 holy wells in entire Burren that's dedicated to a universal saint. A tiny timeline, a tiny bit of history, because their history is long. They're probably, I think most scholars agree, they're pre-Christian in origin. Probably in Ireland's case, cultural overspill from pagan Roman Britain. And that's not to say that it would be pagan. Most of them are probably Christian constructs, but adopted by the wily early Christian monks into their own new religion, the Mediterranean religion of Christianity. The period we're most interested in tonight in terms of the timeline is from the 1600s on. And part of the reason is that most material in relation to holy wells, written material, is from that period, very little from before. And also by going from the 1600s up to date, we get a snapshot of how widespread they were, their heyday 1700s, early 1800s, and their demise thereafter. So in the 1600s, there was what's called an efflorescence of holy wells, and this is the context of the religious persecution of the Roman Catholics. So they're no longer permitted to practice religion at churches, so they practice it in other places in the countryside. And the holy well probably got recycled in part as a mainstay of perpetuation of religion. Also because there was less invigilation of public worship at these places by the British authorities. So an efflorescence of holy wells in that period, but an efflorescence also of well houses, elaborate canopies put onto wells, lending them monumentality in that time. And there are actually 2 holy wells of the 48 in the Burren, which have elaborate canopies dated from the 1700s. And this is one such. It's the well dedicated to Holy Cross. It's in the Valley of Glenina. Again, it's south of Ballyvaughan, and that's an elaborate canopy put up there in the context of the Holy Well becoming also a point of religious perpetuation of religion. The other Holy Well, the only other Holy Well in the Burren, which is canopied in a quasi-elaborate way in that context, in that period, is Tuberfacta, and that's in the village of Kilfenora. So essentially what you're looking at in the 1600s, the 1700s, the early 1800s is not a landscape of churches in Ireland like the rest of continental Europe in terms of religious expression. You're talking about vernacular or unofficial Catholicism, folk religion, mix of nature religion and Christianity. And the landscape is dominated, the religious landscape is dominated by calendar custom, observance of calendar custom, and a divine landscape of holy wells and pilgrimage sites, including, for example, Croke Park, the most notable pilgrimage site. And remember, all of this is being done through the medium of the Irish language. But the heyday was to end in the 1800s in the context of 2 different things. And one of them, of course, was the Great Hunger of 1845 to 1849, when, you know, we had the biggest peacetime tragedy in the story of the world since the Black Death in the 1300s. 1 million out of 8 million died, and 2 million emigrate in the decades successive to that. So, and these people are destitute, and it's not just our vernacular well tradition that has been pressured by demise in their disappearance, but also it's all vernacular expressions, some of which we'll mention earlier on. But the second thing that happened that caused the decline in holy wells was a vacuum was created by the disappearance of these people, and this is readily filled by official Catholicism, which is now emancipated by the British, and it decides to capture this space and shepherd people away from the colourful cosmological into Roman Catholic miserablism. And if anyone's offended by those words, they're actually Tim Robinson's words himself, but it was shepherding people away from the well to the steeple, if you like, and that's the period 1850 to 1875, and it was a highly successful devotional revolution. So where are we now after all that context of Great Famine and devotional revolution? Well, they do survive today in the 21st century in Ireland. There's about 3,200, and I'd say a couple of hundred are still here in the form of what's considered to be marginal survival of archaic elements of the Indo-European world. And the important word there is survival, because it's a very positive thing that in the Republic of Ireland, one of the most globalized nations on earth, according to the Nation Globalized Nation Index, we have these physical evidence of the landscape of these monuments of folk religion and folk medicine from the past.
Tony, sorry to interrupt you. I wonder if you could make your presentation full screen. It's not full screen at the moment.
Sorry, right.
No, it's brilliant. It just improved we'll be able to look at it better.
Yeah, how do we do that?
So if you just, do you see on the left, it says from current slide? It says start slideshow from the current slide, top left. Yeah, that one. Yeah, if you just press that, it should go full screen. Okay. Yeah, perfect. You can just move forward. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, the next slide is of Tubber Dove. We're back to it in. Are we back to it in Carafada? Yeah. So an important point to make about this particular holy well is just a bit. Hold on a sec now. Oh yeah. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Sorry now. I'm on to geography now. That was a little bit of history. There's a little bit of geography. So where are these wells to be found in the landscape? Well, there can be the places they're chosen for. The bodies of water can be chosen because they're are redolent of symbolism for the people that choose them. It can be related to the science of the water. A particular body of water, a particular area can be chosen for particular reasons. They're related to science, even though it's a pre-science area they're choosing them in. And then there's places of flux, like of people like early medieval monastic sites, where we said the early medieval monks readily adopted them from pre-Christianity. Nearness to nucleated settlement, pre-famine villages, for example, near on routeways, arterial routeways, and in mountain passes as well between two communities. And this particular holy well in the Burren, Tuber Fiatla, the Tooth Well in the townland of Gleninchine, is actually, if we dig out the old maps, it's in a mountain pass on an old routeway between the high village of Carron in the interior of the Burren and Ballybohan village on the coast. And the most famous mountain pass well in Ireland is Maugh-Main, a pass in the Mount Turks in Connemara, and that's a mountain pass between two such communities in that particular area. So this is a mountain pass well, this one, Tuber Fiatla, and it's chosen for that purpose, that site. So what I'm trying to get at is none of these wells have random locations, they're all site specific. One last thing, and by the way, the photograph is from 20 years ago. It's from Liam O'Callaghan. It's from the book Fish, Stone, Water. He did the photographs and Rackard did the text. And the photograph is very important as an archive photo because the uprights around the well house are mostly no longer upright. But the uprights, what they served to do was facilitate this walking round or circumambulation, which is a critical element in ritual at the well. In other words, one must walk around the well, one must walk sunwise in harmony with cosmic forces, and must recite prescribed prayer as one walks around in order to get the spiritual or the medical wellness from the water. So that's very important microgeography highlighted by archive photograph. One more example just of a location of a well and why it's there, and this is called Tuber Inin Bui, the well of the Saint Inin Bui, the daughter of Bui, in Common South, on Commonage, in Kildaboy, in the southeast of the Burren. Beautiful well house on the left there, elliptically shaped dry stone. Within it you have the water, and we get a shot on the right of the water itself. Now, this is my thanks to Dr. David Drew for the hydrological report on this. But David explained to me that the water is draining off the surface water is draining into that natural solution hollow. The solution hollow is 15 centimeters deep, and that can fill up to capacity and then it overflows. But because it fills to 15 centimeters deep, David was explaining to me that even in a quite exceptional dry spell in County Clare, the water is highly unlikely to dry out completely. And I would argue that that particular epikarst feature, as opposed to any nearby, was chosen expressly for the purpose because of the stability, the continuity of water therein. In other words, these people, they did not just revere water spiritually, they understood it hydrologically in a pre-science era. The last thing to say about it is it may have been chosen for another reason as well, apart from hydrogeology, and that is symbolism. If you look at the solution hollow there, it's in the shape of a human eye. And that is adverted to in the folklore school scheme in one of the testimonies, that this particular well is in the shape of a human eye. And Jeanette Moore, the great writer on holy wells in Great Britain, says many eye wells, which are cures for eyes, which this one has, have hollows or have the well is in the shape of a human eye. And this is one example of the Burren, and it's not the only one. In Cushgame, the well is in the shape of a human eye, and we've even one Tuber Columkill in Crumlin in Fanor, and that's in the shape of two human eyes, pair of humans, and all three, they are there for eye cure. So in that case, hydrogeology and symbolism were the reasons why that particular site was chosen for the well. There's an extremely rough rough sketch of the Burren, North Clare. And this is about, we're in now to the realm of geography of saints. There's 40, to repeat all the time, 48 holy wells in the Burren, and 30 of the 48 are dedicated to saints, which means 18 have secular dedications. But if we start going into the micro detail of the saint dedications, clear patterns emerge as to their geographic bias within the Burren. For example, in the northeast of the Burren, we have 5 holy wells dedicated to Colman Macdua. And the reason why the 5 of them are in that precise geographical area of the Burren is because Colman Macdua, his kinsman, King Gura of Aina the Kingdom, bestowed upon Colman for religious jurisdiction all of the lands which are coextensive with the modern day parish of Kilmacduagh. for his religious overseeing. And the northeast of the Burren there may have been in some part of the lands that Coleman had religious jurisdiction over, and are definitely branching on to or shouldering on to the parish of Kilmadua in the diocese of Kilmadua, over which Coleman had jurisdiction, religious jurisdiction according to tradition. So you see here how politics has dictated that the 5 holy wells dedicated to Kilmadua are in the northeast of the Burren. By contrast, the Inn and B wells, the 5 of them, the southeast of the Burren, and we're in the realm of politics still. Inn and B is an obscure saintess, and there's no historical evidence she existed, and she may even be in a pre-Christian deity. But her particular dynasty, the dynasty I should say who had her as a cult, were known as the Kinelbui, and they were located in North Cork, today's North Cork, and they were colonizers, and they came up as expansionists into North Clare, and as 18 holy, and they brought their, of course, cult figure with them, cult migration, and there's no less than 18 holy wells in Mid Clare dedicated to Indian Bui, and they, of course, correspond to the land sequestered by the Kinelbui dynasty. And the southeast of Burren, where she has her 5 holy wells in the Burren, are part of that Kinelbui dynasty land. So I'm surprised that her wells, that geographic bias, politics comes to play there historically as well. But what's even more interesting for me is that in the southwest of the Burren, we have a clear geographical bias of saints who have an affinity with the Aran Islands. And that's 5 of them. 5 saints, or 5 wells, 4 saints, all who have, according to this, spent time in the Aran Islands and have actually monuments dedicated to them, and have in the Burren as well. And they are as follows: Brecon of Tumullen in Doolin, Columkill of Crumlin in Fenor, Kieran of Fenor Moor, Brendan of Gowlan in Lisbon-Varna, and Brendan he again of Doolmatphalum in Doolin. And all these places are in the southwest of the Burren, and some of them even enjoy intervisibility with the Aran Islands. And if we look through the old documents of tradition, all of them were contemporaneous with Éanna. He, the godfather of Irish monasticism, he was active on Inishmore, 56th century, and all of these monks would have attended this prestigious school of asceticism of Éanna before returning to the mainland and establishing their own monastic sites. And just to give you one example of the reason why we have these cult placements of holy wells, of saints associated with Éanna and Aran de Burren, we need go no further than Brendan of Doolmatphalum. That's the holy well in the photograph, and we'll talk about it just in a little moment. But in the case of Brendan, according to, again, testimony in the National, the Schools Collection 3738, according to tradition, Brendan lay his head down here on the limestone bed of the River Alley down near Doolin before he went to Aran, or on his way to Aran, are the words. The next morning he woke up and he scooped out rock out of the limestone bed, created this solution hollow, which is just below the big megalith in the photograph, and it was filled with water. Brendan blessed the water, and from there on, it was a holy well. This just proved that these wells have very specific dedications and very specific circumstances because of their strong affinity with the Aran Islands. By the way, in my opinion, this is, I won't have much opinion tonight, I'll do more in facts. That is the most idiosyncratic of the 48 holy wells in the entire Burren region. It's one of only 2 of the 48 not recorded as a national monument, but we will rectify that. But as you can see, it's a very ephemeral hollow in the limestone bed of a river, which fills with water. It's known as a cure. Wart well is the cure. And I was told by a local elder there that all of the offerings historically would have been placed on the megalith, which in part functioned as an altar for the well. Just one more as a postscript on the whole question of the southwest of the Burren and looking seawards, northwards, northwestwards in terms of trying to understand the dedication. And now we're in the little valley of Ucht Dara, still in the southwest of the Burren, But on this occasion, I think we are satisfied now that the dedication here is part of Galway Bay Reach again of the saint, but this time a Galway Bay Reach up to Connemara. And the saint in question, to give him his full title, is Sheenach Mac Dara. And Sheenach in the Irish language means storm, Storm Mac Dara. And the reason is because, according to tradition, Mac Dara in Connemara and on Mac Dara's island off Connemara, he employed gusts of wind to punish the disrespectful. Those who disrespected his island, those who respected his pattern day, they would people passing by who didn't dip their sails to him, well, they would have been punished by gusts of wind with deadly consequences on some occasion. And it's very interesting that one could surmise that perhaps in this case again, we're in the realm of a pre-Christian icon adapted by Christianity. Perhaps he's a pre-Christian storm god in origin. In fact, I advert to my notes here. Tim Robson said, and I quote verbatim from A Little Gaelic Kingdom, his book on Connemara, I suggest that Sheenach, the stormy one, is a regional Celtic god of the winds in a Christianized guise. Connemara Aeolus, Aeolus being the Greek god of the four winds. So that is interesting unto itself. But how can we satisfy ourselves that this holy well in Uachtarra is dedicated to Mac Dara, because a lot of confusion reigns about it. In fact, part of the confusion is that the place names have not been looked at since the time of Westrop over 100 years ago. And in the photograph, though encroached by scrub, there's a little hill which is right beside the early church side, the souterrain, and the holy well. And the place name of that tiny hill is Knock on Atina in the English language. But if one goes back to the Irish language, it is Knock on Antinoch. So I think it's pretty clear there that this particular place name in English was phonetically anglicized 100% to arrive at Knock on Antina, and this means the little hill of Sheenach Mac Dara. And in the case of the holy well, which is on site, it's called in English Tuberine Anina. And that's, I think, and sometimes it happens, a little bit of linguistic butchery, but you know, if you accept that that took place, you come back all the way back to one thing, and that's Tuberantina, the holy well of Sheenach Mac Dara. So it's really exciting if we accept these place names in origin are dedicated to Sheenach Mac Dara, that we have established the cult of Mac Dara in the Burren conclusively, because heretofore he's only been associated with Connemara. But obviously what's happened in the Burren, his cult is long since dormant here, unfortunately, but he remains a 21st century Connemara icon. On the 16th of June every year, there's the patron day, the pattern day, the feast day, which is celebrated by boatloads going to Mac Dara's island. A mention of Pat Cronin. Pat lives in Doolin. He's a caver amongst many other things, Pat. And he did an archaeological survey in 2014 of this particular site. And in it, Pat said, regarding the holy well, that it's 30 meters northeast of the ancient church. It's a solution hollow on the rock. It's surrounded by little dry stone well house, accessed by a stile in a wall, but overcome by briars. But thanks to Pat and the landowner there, Sean is a great Burren heritage enthusiast and very welcoming to me when I was there. There could be, you know, a great chance of not just resurrecting the icon of Mac Dara here, but resurrecting the holy well also. So conclusion, 6 holy wells in the southwestern region are named in honor of saints whose Burren cult status is part of their wider Galway Bay reach. So back to colour wells. And I did say 2 of the wells in Burren are gone from saintly dedications now to secular. And the holy wells in the Burren are colour wells. The Tubber Duff Carfada. We showed it at the top of the programme, Black Well in Kilnaboy, but also we've Tubber Darragh in Antimoor in the Karen area, just opposite essentially from the Carraconnell Stone Fort up an ancient roadway there. Now the one red in this case, and that's why it's called the Red Well, Tubber Darragh. And I think it's thanks to Dr. Sharon Parr of the Burren Farming for Conservation Programme. She helped me identify the algae that's growing in this water. And it's a freshwater algae called Hildebrandia rivillaris, I think. And this is what gives the water its hue. And this colour well, like turberdove, was used in the past dual function for spiritual purposes, but it was also used for dyeing fabrics red. And before, in a pre-chemical age, we used plants to dye fabrics red. And the well is noted, is renowned as a cure for rheumatism. And what do you know? In the past, people wore red flannel as a cure for rheumatism. So it's not by any stretch of the imagination at all to argue that people there, in that case, interacted with the red water for cure for rheumatism, but they also wore red flannel, dyed red from this well water in order to counteract rheumatism. So holy well, this suggests us as well, quite interestingly, holy wells are only a part of a rich and complex folk medicine mosaic of ordinary people in the past in Ireland. And you know, why is it red flannel? Well, like with like, we're probably in the realm here of another branch of their folk medicine called homeopathic magic. Like with like, red flannel because of the redness of the joints, which are the first signs of rheumatism. And here we have the next line, a line from the Precious Schools collection. People who have a tendency to rheumatics should touch their bodies with red flannel. So that's Tuber Derag, the Red Well in Antimoor in Carron. Back to the science of the folk belief and the folk medicine, the hydrogeology. Now, the science of holy wells has been little explored in terms of hydrogeology. Very little has been done on it. Much on the folk belief and the folk custom, but very little on the hydrology. And that the hydrology, the science of it, gives us remarkable insights into why these people choose particular sites for their wells, or particular water for their wells. Now, this is a particular photograph is of a very well-known Burren well at a very well-known site. It's in St. Coleman's Hermitage in a place known commonly as Eagles Rock within the Burren National Park in Carron. It's in forest and it's part of a rich complex of ancient church, Saints Cave and outdoor altars within that complex. The water, as you see there, it's flowing down from the top of the sources, Slieve Carron above, and it flows past the well and then disappears underground eventually. But David examined the well water within the well house, the dry stone construction there, and he noted that the bottom of the well, the ground there, had been dug down a little more. So in other words, the ground surface within the well is lower than the ground surface without, to permit the reception to store some water that's flowing by. The water does to an extent flow in there a little bit, but that's in order to create greater storage for the water. And that means that if the water dries out, the flow from the mountain, the stream will dry out, but the well water will remain stable. There will be a supply of it. So essentially what that is, some holy wells can be sacred springs, but this one is a man-made mini reservoir. And again, highlights the intimacy people had with water in the past and their understanding of it. I mentioned a very interesting project by a former colleague of Dr. David Drew in Trinity College Dublin, Professor Bruce last year, a field survey, hydrological, I should say, 215 wells, a big project. The link is there for you if you want to check it out online. And be wonderful if someone in the field did the equivalent folk study and folk belief, attending these wells and match it with the science of the well water itself and see what comes up. Other than that, in terms of scientific analysis pertaining to wells, we've had a little of analysis of the chemical components of the water, but not a lot. And the most famous chemical analysis is of the Tubernany out, the well of the Mad Ones in the Mad Ones Valley in near Camp County, Kerry. High levels of lithium in the water. Lithium is used in medicine as a mood stabilizer, but I think it's very unwise to draw any conclusions from the analysis of even a couple of wells that turn up with the chemicals which are good for particular ailments the well is renowned for. In fact, I would say that largely the cures were very related to strong folk beliefs rather than science, but nonetheless, it's just documenting a little bit of science done pertaining to wells. We're still at the same site, St. Coleman's Hermitage and Holy Well in Kilheela in Carron. And I just want to talk now a little about Holy Wells as contested 21st century spiritual landscapes. There may not be a lot of them left. The enthusiasts of them may be in the minority, and yet they do excite contestation on occasion. The location is the Burren National Park, and it's this particular Holy Well site is on a walking trail. So that means it's really, very progressive at the park to devise such trails. But the downside and the challenge is, of course, it's unsupervised access to areas that can be quite fragile, which this particular site is. And one of the things that happened as a result of this walkway being developed in this particular area and through this hermitage was there was, to use that word again, an efflorescence of offerings that on site. A huge spike in the offerings there, which would suggest that some of the people who were walking were making casual depositions instead of the heartfelt, single-minded depositions in the past. So this brings up the whole question of, and this is the last line in this particular slide, is the deposition of the offerings there today in such numbers, is that contrived tradition? And should all the offerings be removed? Or is it tradition in the form of transition because offerings were made there in the past in a heartfelt way? So what I did was I approached Burren Cliffs and Moor Geopark, and they very kindly acceded to my request to do a report through their auspices, which is online if you would like to have a read. What I wanted to do in the case of the offerings was to try to understand a little the modern pilgrim, try to understand why there was so much offerings, where they were, and what character the offerings were. And of the character of them, 400 of them there, mostly were ribbons, which means it's synthetic material. And that's, apart from the tradition of the well norm of the past, where, yes, if there were things tied on trees, a tree would be supernatural like the well. You would have the possibility that overhung the well to spirit away the illness. But it was an item of your clothing, a piece of your clothing represented sickness, and it was not a synthetic thing. That's one significant change from tradition. And the other thing was, if there was a holy well on site that was considered to be supernatural, like the well water, all the offerings, all the rags would be concentrated in one particular tree. Only one tree is supernatural at such sites. But I found in my analysis of the offerings there that there was the scattergun approach by the modern pilgrim, inverted commas, and there was no less than 20 sites of deposition on site, and including 16 trees. And it's a big push to argue that there's 16 supernatural trees on site. Tiny number of offerings of religious and character. And again, this is departure from the norm that there would be, I think it was less than 10 of 400 were religious and character. So it is a big question. There's no easy answer. And it's a very interesting debate amongst heritage enthusiasts as to what is to happen or not in cases like this. But an argument for the retention of sites like that perhaps could be that some of them are genuinely heartfelt depositions in the spirit of the past, and they should not be removed in one foul swoop with everything else. But it's a contested 21st spiritual landscape, on occasion the Holy Well. So I'd like to, I addressed it very superficially, but I'd like now to look at the big picture about people and this health geography of Holy Wells. Holy Wells were frequented in the past in order to get towards from the water. The water is considered supernatural, and every Holy Well had an identified cure, like it was renounced cure for something. But this is Tuber Gahard, and it means the well on high, because it's on limestone pavement, just a little above the Valley of Gregan in the north of the Burren. And the catchment area for this Holy Well in the past would have been Gregan Valley. And the catchment area for Corkscrew Hill National School, which is now closed in part in the past, would have been that same Gregan Valley where the habitués of this well would have lived. And in looking at the school's collection for the National School of Corkscrew Hill, I read there in the Gaelic language that there were 20 ailments for which folk cures were given. And one of them was for the eye, and that was particularly interesting to me, because that particular holy well is eye ailment. But this is just to prove that people are resorting to other cues or other forms of medicine for eye ailments as well. Because to translate the bit in Gaelic, here is from the Corkscrew Hill National School is the following. Sty in the eye, look with your sore eye through a gold ring in a green field. And that brings us to the bigger picture of what was the breakdown and what did you do in terms of folk medicine besides holy wells. And Dr. Grania Burren and Tiziana Soberino in 2018 took 6,845 samples from the half a million manuscript pages of the school's collection, and all relating to folk cures. And they found, and this is a fascinating breakdown of the folk medicine culture of pre-famine to extent post-famine people in Ireland were poor financially. And 50% of their folk medicine was related to herbs, herbalism, plants, minerals, and animals. They're not interaction with the natural world for cures. But the rest of it was broken down into a type called magical religious cures. And that's the use of charms, holy words, and holy actions in order to cure disease. And this is where my particular interest is. Holy wells come in at 14% of the entire folk medicine of these people in the past. So it just to highlight how rich and complex and how big the picture is in terms of folk medicine of our forebears. 4% went to healers, intergenerational healers, and there's hundreds of them still operating in Ireland today and using incantations attendant on their healing ritual to do. And 24% is sympathetic magic, and that includes homeopathic magic, which we did refer to earlier on. And it's really important to emphasize this, that the World Health Organization today in the 20th century, 21st century, acknowledges that traditional folk medicine throughout the world, and that includes all the above we've just gone through today's list, has a long history globally in health maintenance, disease prevention, and treatment. I'm back to contested spiritual landscapes, but I'm back in time now. And I'm on the grounds of Lemonade Castle. And we're within, I would say, 30 meters of the residence of the O'Briens, that same castle in the parish of Killavoy. And again, David True has come to my help here because he's looked at the hydrogeology of this particular well, St. Martin's. Well, St. Martin, just in brackets, is the second of the two universal saints of all the 48 in the Burren. Only two in St. Martin is the second one. And this holy well has a beautiful flag covering it. And David has had a look at the well scientifically, and he's told me that it was, and actually occurring spring, it was welled, the water was welled, and then a hollow, about 60 centimeters deep, was dug down for storage, to store water. So this was an important source of water for secular purposes in the past if you're storing it. And if you tie that in, again, with an excerpt from the school's collection, where somebody, and unfortunately not authenticated this, said that this holy well was recycled by the O'Briens in the castle, secularized by them for the water supply for the castle, which would tie in symphony with the idea of 60 centimeters of it going deep for storage. And also, they say rather interestingly in the school's collection, and at which point the holy well was out of bounds to the mere Irish and their suspicious practices. It's a fascinating, unauthenticated take on the demise of the holy well of St. Martin, obviously a long time ago. Mary Tunney of the National Monument Service, she has written that the water may have been diverted to fish ponds, but it was diverted to fish ponds, or diverted to castle, or diverted to two. They were all leading only one way. This is a very cogent instance of elite prejudice, whereby in the past was physical denial of the sacred space of the poor was validated by the elite in part by their ideological antipathy to these structures. The Holy Well in Ireland was in the past a consistent signifier of the cultural incivility of the Irish poor, not just to the British elite, but to the small Irish elite as well, which would have included the O'Briens. Here's another extravagant house, but this time the context is the 1840s. Most people now who live in the Burren near it or even beyond in Ireland to extent, because this is such an eye-catching Gothic revival structure, would know of it. Regarding the well, it's in Glenina. Again, it's in a valley south of Ballyvaughan. And Cornan, if you were a saint, it's a bit obscure, the thing. And I found one and only reference to this particular water body being a holy well. Like the last one, it was at a certain point, the spring was welled at a certain point and became the Ballyvaughan water supply. But that's not to exclude the possibility that it had been a holy well previously. No local people regard it as a holy well now, but there is a possibility that once it was. Let's say that much. Let's be careful with our English here. But here, what I want to do is put a bit of social context into this holy well regarding what was life like for these people who would have frequented holy wells like this or lived in this area where such holy wells were. In that parish of Glenina, in the 1840s, the entire 9 townlands were owned by 2 individuals. One of them was called Blood, and he, without question, owns the lands for this particular Pinnacle well is built, would have commissioned the building of this kind of lavish Gothic fantasy structure. 146 houses in the parish, and 90% of the people were living in houses of 4 classification. According to the census of 1841, essentially were living in miserable hovels. So the irony of it is that this was the 1860s, just 20 years later, the well was welled, it was canopied with this Gothic structure, a display of exhibitionist architecture, if you like. And what I'd argue is the elegance of the housing of the water, in contrast to the inelegance or the misery of the housing of the human beings, is arguably a monument to profound inegalitarianism. The broader point being, the microgeography of holy wells on occasion can afford a sharp insight into the wider human history of an area. So now on to the pattern, patron day, the communal celebration of the feast day of the saint. And this took place, the focal point of this celebration was either mountaintops or holy wells. Almost all of the wells that we featured previously, almost all of the 48 holy wells in Burren have no record of a pattern. And maybe, just maybe, they were frequented on an individual basis, maybe a little flux on the feast day of the saint. But the distinction between the pattern day and the other wells, the minor wells, is that it's communal celebration of the saint's feast day, communality. And another distinction is that the program is long. It's a 2-day affair. And in the case of this holy well, St. Columkill Holy Well in the valley of Glen Columkill in the parish of Cairn, one of those beautiful holy wells in the region. You can see there the water, the reflection of the ash trees, the beautiful cross and the dry stone construction of the well. And the order of business in this case was, this feast saint day is 9th of June, but on the vigil, there is first a fair, and there is a field to this day called the Janesee Field, known to local people, where the fair took place. And after that evening, you had the vigil. And when that took place, there was maybe song and dance thereafter. On the morning of the 9th, you'd have religious observation at the well also. And then after that, you'd have the race meeting. And that again, the race meeting, or the race course of Turlockmore, the townland adjacent to Glen Columkill, 4.5 miles long, and local people can describe readily the course of the race course still today. So it's a rich pattern landscape, long program, community celebrated, and it's a rich pattern landscape in this case, running across 2 townlands. The religious monuments or the physical evidence of the religious part of the pattern is in the townland of Glen Columkill. The secular, the fair field, and the race course are in the townland of Turlockmore. And a large catchment area. This is how the pattern days were defined, because in this case, there's proof of it. Most of the other holy wells were drawing people from nearby. But in this case, we've documentary evidence that Glen Columkill on the 8th and 9th of June was drawing people from as far away as Connemara, getting boats over to Kinvara and proceeding then by road to the pattern site. So there would have been commercial activity attendant on these rich kind of theatre of human activity, rich and varied commercial activity, because the period is so long time, and you have liberal sales of drink and food, amongst other things. You would have tricksters kind of piggybacking on the flux of people. You have had sport and music and song and dance, and this is the context is these people who are impoverished, politically colonized, disenfranchised, abject poverty, miserable hovels, monoculture diet of potatoes. They're largely outside the control of the doctrinaire constabulary clergy at great occasion of popular assembly of the ordinary people, including markets and fairs and weddings and wakes and funerals and pattern days. And that's what this is all about. So one of the things that took place at the pattern days, apart from all described now, is stick fighting, vernacular fencing. And this is just another part of the rich vernacular traditions of these pre-famine and slightly post-famine poor in Ireland, apart from the Holy Well, vernacular fencing, and a few other things which I'll mention before we finish. The origins are obscure, but by the late 18th century, an accepted part of social life in town and country at occasions of popular assembly, which we mentioned earlier, like wakes, funerals, weddings, markets, fairs, and Holy Well pattern days. The weapon was the length of a walking stick, largely made of ash, and we have, oral narrative within the region of the ash being seasoned in the winter in the chimney to make it, well, the blow from it kind of all the harder. And the format was numerous single combats, and always was they were drawn from territory into distinct territory and rivals between territory, and there would be a quarrel, and the antiquity quarrel would be the basis of the fight, and it was kind of strict conventions pertaining to the fight, and highly skilled sense of fair play, and just a heroic aura around the best fighters, and any any blows or that took place there were scores that were never settled outside of faction fights, ritualized faction fighting in ordinary life. So quite ritualized the whole thing. But to tell you the unvarnished truth, some of these occasions are drink induced. Sorry, all of them are drink induced, and some people leave earlier in the day, and some people aren't around when it gets a bit more bacchanalian at the pattern day. But there was occasional descent into, drink-induced plebeian mayhem, what they considered afterwards, of course, to be a regretful departure from the north, and fatalities occurred, and serious injury as well. But can we contextualize it? We've tried a little. Let's try a bit harder. Let's look at Venice, Italy, the tradition there of vernacular fist fighting, which is contemporaneous with the stick fighting in Ireland. And the great historian Robert Davis, United States historian Robert Davis, describes how these fist fights took place on Il Ponte dei Pugni in Venice, the bridge of the fists. And the idea was that the strike of your opponent, the big strike, would land him in the cold and sewage-strewn canals of Venice. But Davis argued, even though there would have been, some of the violence would have led to serious disrepair on occasion, that this is, if decontextualized, these people are dehumanized. But if you get a context, you understand, and he argues that this was an escape for them, for these people, from the daily allotment of work and subservience. It was an alternative world in part of honor and respect. And I would argue that we cannot understand, the botteruct, the fist fighting, the Irish martial arts, if you like, of faction fighting without contextualizing it to the wider picture of their lives and how they lived. Regarding that site at Glencullen, some of the faction fights that took place there, attended on the pattern, was invariably after the race meeting on the second day, 9th of June. And, in 1861, the Galway Advertiser reported on faction fights at Turlough that particular year. And further, they said that 4 faction fighters had been shot dead by the police at a faction fight on another occasion at Turlough. And the reason why that photograph is there is because that is a house near the race course at Turlough, and a local person has told me, and I've recorded this, that the people who own that house in the past, they don't own it anymore. The Royal Irish Constabulary, which had their barracks at Rockville House, which was too far from the main action they judged, the Royal Irish Constabulary rented a room of that house as a cooling station for some of the hotheads, which were over exuberant with the violence at the faction fights attended on St. Columbkille's pattern. And thereafter, the faction fighting went into decline, with all vernacular pursuits following on from the Great Hunger of 1845-49. So this is very important in terms of understanding why Holy Wells declined and why they're in such few numbers and frequented today. It happened again in a very specific context, the carnage caused by the potato famine. 3 million of these arguably habitués of the well tradition disappear or die. An enormous socio-cultural transformation in Ireland after the famine. We go from Gaelic speaking, rural and oral tradition to English speaking, urban and literate. And then there's the small matter, and I'm being very ironic with the use of the adjective small there, of the devotional revolution conducted by the Roman Catholic Church. The occupied, the vacuum filled, this church is now emancipated and emboldened, and it's now set on filling the vacuum created by the departure of these people with a rigidly authoritarian program of institutional Roman Catholicism. And this program is facilitated by extraordinarily low priest-people ratios. In other words, priest to people by the early 20th century in Ireland was 1 priest to 1,100 human beings. It was the lowest in the entire world. And, with this kind of high ratio, or high ratio, maybe perhaps I say, of priest to people, this facilitated the program of the institutionalization of culture. And national identity got a makeover. And Irishness was indelibly linked with adherence to strict official Catholicism. And some of us are old enough to know this very narrow definition of national identity obtained in Ireland to as recently as the 1960s. So what does this mean in terms of our history, our culture, and our past? It meant effectively that anything that was in this way of this program was almost obliterated. There was cultural cleansing of rich, expressive vernacular traditions that did not coincide with this new imagination of the identity of the Irish in Ireland. Folk religion was suppressed, as in well frequentation. And the excuse that the church used was wonderful. They said the excesses at the pattern post a religious expression was not very Christian, which is true, but that was largely a pretext for control of the people, and it was highly successful as an exercise, as we know. Mortuary customs were heavily diminished. The keening, which was a really extraordinary theatrical kind of Gothic excess way of conducted by women of mourning the dead, that was largely annihilated by the church because it was the work of the women and because some of it was so exaggerated, theatrical and cathartic in the view of the church. Mortuary custom in terms of the wake, that too had to be diminished greatly in use, particularly because of the carnivalesque or non-Christian aspect of the wake in Ireland. And traditional dance, as we knew it, as well, was supplanted by the contrived traditional dance we have today, because the traditional dance then was considered to not fit into this new national identity because of the intimacy of the space that was occupied by men and women together, and that some of the steps were considered to be quite transgressive. And the whole point of this is that the Holy Well is part of a bigger picture in terms of its demise as a vernacular force within us as a people. And these are the words of Kevin Whelan, the great historical geographer. He says that there are immeasurable losses at the heart of historic justice. And these losses of these rich expressive of vernacular tradition are indeed immeasurable. And it's the same man, Kevin Whelan, who says, people make their own history. These people, they made their own history, but not in conditions of their own choosing. Very nearly there, but Cowell Bran, where is Bran? Did Bran, it looks like Bran, the Holy Well dedicated to Bran, in Formoil, in the valley of the Car Valley in Fenor. Fortunately, it's almost certain the Holy Well is no longer extant. It's gone. And perhaps this is, legacy of the whole transformation we talked about earlier on of institutionalism replacing the vernacular. But what's interesting here is that this is a little excerpt from the Tim Robinson map of the Burren. And on the map, and this is from 1999, Tim Robinson gives the name of the Holy Well as Tubber Bran, and that means Bran's Well. Now, this is the only ever naming of the well I've come across in documentation. And it is very precious as a result. And I would presume that Tim Robinson got this from the Ordnance Survey place names. I haven't checked them yet. But the reason why this is so important is the well now, or the well site, has gone from anonymity to personality. And of course, it asks the question also, could it be at all possible that the Bran in question is the celebrated greyhound, the hunting hound of Fionn MacCool, the leader of the Fianna, which is a warrior elite in Irish mythology. So this, I looked into this a bit and to see were any other indications in this fairly immediate area of the cult of Bran, Fionn, and Fianna. And as it happens, Westrop, the godfather of Burren archaeology, has written that the Fianna had hunting grounds in Formoil, and that Holy Well dedicated to Bran is in the Formoil townland. And not only that, but 4 kilometers northwest of the Holy Well Tubber Bran, there are not one but 2 cairns on high ground, one dedicated to Bran and one dedicated to his master, the leader of the Fianna, and that is Fionn. So I think the case is extremely strong, if not overwhelming, that this Holy Well is actually dedicated to a celebrated invulnerable greyhound, and that is Bran. And this is important because even if the well is lost physically, the well site obviously there and documented by Robinson, we can pass on to generations after us and argue that this Holy Well site was a heady cocktail in the past of folk medicine, folk religion, and mythology, and that the miraculous properties of this well were actually ascribed to a greyhound. The last lines, I hope you enjoyed it, got a kick out of the evening, but the last lines I'm going to leave to a late great grandmaster of words. It is Seamus Heaney, and the 2 lines are from the Cure at Troy. Believe that further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and holy wells. Gormila Margaret, thanks very much.
Thank you, Tony. That was beautiful. I didn't want to stop you. We are close to 9 p.m., but it was fascinating, and such depth of research. And thank you for sharing with us today. I'm sure you've given people a lot of inspiration to go exploring the Holy Wells in their neighborhood. There's a few questions. We won't have time to go through them, but I might summarize them. There's a few people asking about Holy Wells in their area, Tubber Facna, the well in Temple Cronin, and St. Bridget's well in Liscannor. If people want to learn more about the wells that in their neighborhoods or these areas, is there a resource that they can use?
That's a question for me, primarily, is it? Yeah. Well, there's a couple of great resources. Yeah, one is that on the Clare Library website, there is an index of the 220 so holy wells in the region, alphabetically Aran. So that's an excellent resource. And this new Clare Holy Wells Project online as well will have them photographed and documented as well in writing. And also there's the book by Michael Hoolan, The Holy Wells of Clare. So we are well resourced in Clare in terms of documentation of the wells.
Okay, great. My colleague John is here. John, is there a question you want to ask? You might ask a question and then we might finish up for the evening.
Yeah, there's a question from Helen McCormick, who's interested in the well near the small church at Temple Cronin. Tony, can you enlighten us on that any further?
Yeah, that's it's dedicated to St. Cronin. It's for cure of eye ailments. And what's remarkable about that is that there is a semicircular wall around the well, small in scale, very unusual wall, semicircular in shape. And there is a mound within the semicircular space of wall where the well is. And I'm pretty sure that was a dry stone altar about 2 meters in height, around which people conducted a circumambulation or walked around in order to do the penitence. So it's a beautiful creation of a penitential space around the Holy Well, because the Holy Well is in the base of the cliff. You couldn't walk around that. So what did you do to create a beautiful penitential space in order to facilitate around it? One more thing, John, there is one other Holy Well at that site, but it's lost for the moment, and we're all the time trying to get it back. It's called the Eye Well, so St. Cronin's Well and the Eye Well. So 2 wells at that site, which is quite interesting.
Okay. Wonderful answer. Thank you so much, Tony. I'm going to have to wrap it up for the evening, but I just want to say a big thank you to you for taking the time today and sharing your research with us. We've recorded the webinar and we'll have it up on our YouTube channel. So for those who couldn't attend, would have the possibility of viewing it again. And thanks again to so many of our attendees tuning in this evening from various places in Ireland, Tipperary, Clare, Limerick, but also abroad from Switzerland, from Brussels, from America and Arizona and North Carolina. So thank you. It's wonderful to know that there's such interest out there in what you had to say today, Tony. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, John, and thank you, Tony. And
thanks
Tony,
a lot, Prajali.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Thanks,
Okay.
John.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.